In a world where love stories are written by tabloids and fairy tales end with crowns, what happens when the most beloved couple on earth must choose between their hearts and their duty? When Prince Alexander and Princess Isabella stood on the palace balcony that fateful morning, millions watched through their screens, unaware they were witnessing the beginning of the most heart-wrenching royal saga in modern history. Behind the perfect smiles and coordinated waves lay a secret so devastating it would shake the very foundations of the monarchy and prove that even those born to rule are not immune to life's cruelest twists of fate. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Princess Isabella Victoria Cambridge stood before her vanity mirror, her trembling hands struggling to fasten the pearl necklace that had belonged to 5 generations of royal women before her. Today was supposed to be a celebration, the 10th anniversary of her marriage to Prince Alexander. But the weight of the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago made every breath feel like a betrayal of the happiness she was expected to display. Alexander entered their private chambers with his usual grace, his tall frame filling the doorway as he adjusted the ceremonial medals adorning his navy uniform. At 38, he still possessed the boyish charm that had captured Isabella's heart at university, though recent months had carved new lines around his emerald eyes. The couple had spent a decade perfecting the art of reading each other's emotions in public while maintaining the composure expected of modern royalty. But this morning, even Alexander's practiced smile couldn't hide the storm brewing beneath the surface. "The cars arrive in 20 minutes, he said softly, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. Isabella nodded, her reflection showing a woman who had mastered the delicate balance between accessibility and majesty. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her sapphire blue dress had been chosen to complement Alexander's uniform, every detail calculated to present the picture of royal harmony that their subjects expected to see. The envelope lay on Alexander's desk, its official seal already broken, its contents having shattered their world in the span of a single paragraph. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the kingdom's most respected oncologist, had delivered news that no amount of royal protocol could soften. Isabella's cancer had returned, more aggressive than before, and this time the prognosis carried words that royalty was never supposed to hear. Terminal, months not years, and decisions that needed to be made immediately. Their children, Prince James, aged 8, and Princess Emma, aged 5, remained blissfully unaware of the hurricane about to engulf their family. The palace staff had been sworn to secrecy, and only Alexander's private secretary, Margaret Whitman, and Isabella's closest confidant, Lady Sarah Morton, knew the truth that would soon change everything. The couple had agreed to maintain normalcy for as long as possible, but both understood that their time for pretending was rapidly running out. As they descended the grand staircase together, Isabella's hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm, hundreds of years of royal tradition seemed to whisper from the portraits lining the walls. Queen Adelaide the Wise, who had ruled for 40 years. King Frederick the Bold, who had led the kingdom through its darkest war. Princess Charlotte the Beloved, who had died too young and was still mourned a century later. Isabella wondered if her own portrait would someday hang among them, and what future generations would say about the princess who had tried to choose love over duty and paid the ultimate price. The anniversary celebration was to be held at the Royal Opera House, where they had shared their first official date as an engaged couple. 1,200 guests, including heads of state, celebrities, and representatives from the dozens of charities the couple supported, would gather to honor their decade of service and partnership. Isabella had helped plan every detail, from the menu featuring dishes from each region of their kingdom to the musical program showcasing local talent they had discovered during their royal tours. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was celebrating a marriage that might not survive another year, not because their love had failed, but because time itself was failing them. She thought of the vows they had spoken 10 years ago in the cathedral, promising to love each other in sickness and in health, for better or worse, until death did them part. She had never imagined that those words, spoken with such hope and certainty, would become a prophecy fulfilled so soon. Alexander helped her into the car, his touch lingering a moment longer than protocol demanded. As they drove through the streets lined with well-wishers waving flags and holding signs celebrating their anniversary, Isabella pressed her face to the window and tried to memorize every detail. The flower vendor who always smiled and waved when their car passed. The young mother holding up her toddler to see the royal couple. The elderly man who stood at the same corner every time they traveled this route, wearing his military medals and saluting with pride. These people had welcomed her as their princess with open hearts, and she had spent 10 years trying to prove worthy of their trust. She had championed causes close to her heart, from children's literacy to mental health awareness, and had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions. The thought of disappointing them, of leaving them, felt almost as devastating as the thought of leaving Alexander and their children. The car pulled up to the opera house, and Isabella could see the flashing cameras of the press photographers, the red carpet leading to the entrance, the crowds of spectators hoping for a glimpse of their beloved royal couple. In a few moments, she would have to step out of this protected space and become Princess Isabella again, smiling and waving and giving everyone the fairy tale they wanted to believe in. Alexander took her hand as they waited for their security detail to give the all-clear signal. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, a private code they had developed years ago to communicate love and support in public moments when words were impossible. 3 circles meant, I love you. 4 meant, stay strong. 5 meant, we'll get through this together. Today, his thumb traced 6 circles, and Isabella felt tears threaten to spill as she understood his message. Forever, no matter what. The car door opened, and the roar of the crowd washed over them like a wave. Isabella straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to give the performance of her lifetime. As she stepped onto the red carpet, Alexander's hand steady at her back, she smiled with genuine warmth at the faces in the crowd, storing up their love like a treasure she could draw upon in the dark days ahead. The cameras flashed, and the questions came from the press pen. Your Royal Highnesses, how does it feel to celebrate 10 wonderful years together? Princess Isabella, can you tell us about your upcoming projects? Prince Alexander, what's the secret to your successful marriage? Alexander fielded the questions with his usual diplomatic skill, while Isabella concentrated on not letting her mask slip, on continuing to be the princess these people deserved. Inside the opera house, the couple was greeted by a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Isabella looked up at Alexander, and, for just a moment, let herself imagine that this wasn't the beginning of the end, but simply another chapter in their love story. The orchestra began to play their wedding song, and as Alexander led her onto the dance floor for the traditional first dance, Isabella closed her eyes and let herself believe, for just a few minutes more, that fairy tales could have happy endings. But even as they swayed together, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heart beating strong and steady, Isabella knew that the hardest part wasn't the dying itself, it was the living they still had to do, and the impossible choice that lay ahead of them both. The weeks following their anniversary celebration blurred together in a haze of medical appointments, hushed conversations, and increasingly elaborate efforts to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Isabella had insisted on keeping her regular schedule, attending the opening of a new children's hospital wing, hosting a reception for emerging artists, and making her monthly visit to the homeless shelter where she had been volunteering for 5 years. Each engagement became both a gift and a torment, as she tried to pour a lifetime of caring into every interaction while her body grew weaker with each passing day. Dr. Thornfield had been blunt during their private meeting at the palace. The cancer had metastasized beyond the reach of conventional treatment, and while experimental therapies existed, they would require Isabella to spend months in treatment facilities far from her family and royal duties. Even then, the chances of success were slim, and the side effects would make public appearances impossible. The alternative, palliative care, would allow her to remain at home with her family, but meant accepting that their time together was measured in months, not years. Alexander had insisted on exploring every option, consulting with specialists in Switzerland, Johns Hopkins, and Tokyo. His royal aide had discreetly arranged for a parade of the world's leading oncologists to visit the palace under the guise of other official business. Each consultation brought the same devastating conclusion. Princess Isabella was dying, and there was nothing that royal privilege or unlimited resources could do to change that fundamental fact. The decision of when and how to tell their children became a daily agony. Prince James had begun asking why his mother looked tired all the time, and why the family doctor visited so frequently. Princess Emma, more perceptive than her age suggested, had started drawing pictures of the family with her mother surrounded by angels, an intuition that chilled Isabella to her core. Child psychologists, family therapists, and clergy had all offered advice, but none could ease the burden of destroying their children's sense of security and innocence. Isabella found herself studying Alexander when he thought she wasn't looking, memorizing the way he frowned slightly when concentrating on state papers, how his eyes crinkled when he genuinely laughed at something James said, the gentle way he braided Emma's hair before bedtime. She began writing letters, dozens of them, to be opened on future birthdays, graduations, wedding days, and ordinary Tuesdays when her children might need to hear their mother's voice again. The palace staff, sworn to secrecy but clearly aware that something was deeply wrong, began treating Isabella with a reverence that felt like mourning. Her lady-in-waiting, Caroline, had served the royal family for 15 years and knew every nuance of court etiquette, but lately she had been struggling to maintain her professional composure. The head gardener had taken to leaving Isabella's favorite flowers outside her private sitting room each morning. Even the usually stoic palace guards seemed to stand a little straighter when she passed, as if their respect could somehow armor her against what was coming. The couple's private moments became precious and painful in equal measure. They took long walks through the palace gardens after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing, avoiding the future while trying to make peace with the past. Alexander had become fiercely protective, canceling his own engagements to spend more time at home, much to the confusion of his private secretary who couldn't understand the sudden shift in priorities. One evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room, Isabella broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "We need to start planning," she said quietly, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on a scarf for James. "The children, the announcement, the transition. We can't keep pretending this isn't happening." Alexander looked up from the briefing papers he hadn't been reading. "The doctors in Geneva want to try a new immunotherapy protocol. It's showing promise in trials." "Alexander." Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. "We've talked to 7 specialists. The answer is always the same. Then, we'll talk to 7 more. Or 70 more. I won't just accept this." Isabella set down her knitting and moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "What if we accepted it together? What if instead of fighting what we can't change, we focused on making the most of the time we have?" Alexander's composure finally cracked. "I can't lose you. I won't know how to be a king without you. I won't know how to be a father without you. I won't know how to be me without you." She pulled him into her arms, this strong man who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, who had never been allowed to show weakness or uncertainty in public. "You'll know because I'll have taught you everything I can before I go. And because the man I fell in love with was already everything he needed to be." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Emma appeared in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "I had a bad dream," she announced, padding across the room to climb onto her mother's lap. Isabella felt the familiar ache of knowing how many bedtime stories she wouldn't be there to read, how many nightmares she wouldn't be there to chase away. "What was your dream about, little one?" Alexander asked, making room for his daughter between them. "The angels were trying to take Mama away, but I told them she couldn't go because we need her here." Alexander and Isabella exchanged a look over their daughter's head. The time for pretending was running out faster than they had hoped. The next morning brought a call from the palace press secretary, David Harrison, who had been fielding an increasing number of inquiries from journalists who sensed that something was happening behind palace walls. Royal correspondents had noticed the increased security, the canceled engagements, the way photographers were being kept at greater distances during public appearances. Rumors were beginning to circulate in the press, ranging from the plausible to the absurd, but all centered on the growing certainty that the royal family was facing a crisis. "We need to get ahead of this," David advised during an emergency meeting in Alexander's study. "The longer we wait, the more speculation builds, and the harder it becomes to control the narrative." Isabella sat quietly as the men debated strategy, feeling like a spectator in discussions about her own life and death. Finally, she spoke up. "I want to tell them myself." "Your Highness." David looked confused. "The announcement. I want to make it myself, in my own words. I want to thank the people for 10 years of love and support, and I want to ask for their understanding in the months ahead. No prepared statements, no official spokesman. Just me, talking to them as honestly as I can." Alexander reached for her hand. "Are you certain? Once we do this, there's no going back. Everything changes." Isabella nodded. "Everything is changing anyway. At least this way, we control how it happens." The decision set in motion a carefully choreographed plan that would forever alter the relationship between the royal family and their subjects. The announcement would be made in a live television broadcast from the palace, followed by a written statement detailing Isabella's diagnosis and treatment decisions. Security protocols would be heightened, public appearances would be limited, and the children would be gradually withdrawn from public view to protect them from the inevitable media frenzy. But first, Isabella had one more public engagement she was determined to keep. The annual children's Christmas party at the palace, where she had played host to disadvantaged children from across the kingdom for the past 9 years, was scheduled for the following week. It would be her farewell, though the children attending wouldn't know that. She wanted to give them one perfect day, filled with magic and wonder and the kind of joy that had made all her years of service worthwhile. As she stood at the window of her sitting room, watching Alexander play football with James in the garden while Emma fed the palace swans, Isabella felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with her grief. She had been given 10 years of extraordinary love, the privilege of serving people who had embraced her as their own, and the chance to be mother to 2 remarkable children who would carry her love with them always. The hardest goodbyes, she realized, were not the final ones, but all the small farewells that came before, each precious moment slipping away like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold on to but beautiful in its passing. The palace had been transformed into a winter wonderland for the annual children's Christmas party, though Isabella knew this year's celebration would be her last. Garlands of evergreen wound around the marble columns, thousands of twinkling lights cast everything in a warm glow, and the great ballroom had been converted into various activity stations where children could decorate cookies, create ornaments, and meet costumed characters from beloved fairy tales. Isabella moved through the party with deliberate grace, stopping to admire each child's artwork, listening intently to their excited chatter about Christmas wishes and school achievements. She knelt down to be at eye level with a shy 7-year-old named Lucy, whose foster mother had brought her to the party for the first time. "I drew you a picture," Lucy whispered, holding out a crayon drawing of a princess with auburn hair and a kind smile. "My teacher said you help children like me." Isabella accepted the drawing with the same ceremony she would show a state gift, her throat tight with emotion. "This is absolutely beautiful, Lucy. Would you like to help me hang it on the special art wall?" Together, they walked to a designated area where dozens of children's drawings and letters were displayed. Isabella made a point of reading each one aloud, her voice steady despite the knowledge that these children would remember this day long after she was gone. Some had drawn pictures of her and Alexander. Others had written thank-you notes for the toys and books the palace had donated to local charities, and a few had shared their hopes for the future with the innocent optimism that only children possess. Alexander appeared at her side during a brief lull in activities, his own interactions with the children tinged with the same bittersweet awareness. They had agreed that this party would be perfect, that these children would have a magical day regardless of the personal cost to their hosts. It was, in many ways, their love letter to a decade of public service, a final gift to the people who had given them so much purpose and meaning. "The little boy by the Christmas tree wants to know if you can help him write a letter to Father Christmas," Alexander murmured, nodding toward 8-year-old Marcus, whose enthusiasm had been infectious all afternoon. Isabella spent the next 20 minutes helping Marcus compose his letter, which included requests for toys for his younger sister, a warm coat for his grandmother, and peace for all the families who didn't have enough food. His selflessness reminded Isabella why she had always found such joy in these events, how children possessed an innate wisdom about what truly mattered in life. As the afternoon drew to a close, the children gathered in a circle for the traditional storytelling session. Isabella had chosen a tale about a princess who discovered that the greatest magic wasn't in her crown or castle, but in the love she shared with others. As she read, she caught sight of her own children sitting among their guests, James helping a younger boy understand the story, while Emma shared her sweets with a girl who had been too shy to ask for seconds. The children began to leave as the sun set, each hugging Isabella goodbye with the pure affection that had sustained her through difficult days throughout her royal career. Their parents thanked her repeatedly, many sharing stories about how the palace's various charitable initiatives had touched their families. Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter had participated in Isabella's literacy program, pressed a handmade card into the princess's hands. "Sarah has been reading every day since she met you last year," she said, tears in her eyes. "You gave her confidence in herself that we could never afford to buy. Thank you for caring about our children." After the last guest had departed, Isabella stood in the emptied ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration and the overwhelming weight of what came next. Tomorrow, they would finalize the television address that would change everything. The day after that, their private crisis would become public property, subject to analysis and speculation by millions of strangers. The family dinner that evening was quieter than usual. James and Emma were exhausted from the party but still excited, chattering about their favorite moments and asking when they could have another party. Alexander and Isabella exchanged glances across the table, both thinking the same thought. How do you tell children that their world is about to shatter? After the children were in bed, the couple retreated to Alexander's study where David Harrison waited with final drafts of the announcement. Isabella had insisted on writing her own speech, rejecting the formal language suggested by the palace communications team in favor of words that felt authentic and personal. I've been thinking about what I want to say, Isabella began, settling into the chair across from Alexander's desk. Not just about the diagnosis, but about what these 10 years have meant. I want people to understand that being their princess has been the greatest privilege of my life, and that leaving them is the hardest thing I'll ever have to do. David looked uncomfortable. Your Highness, with respect, the public will be looking for reassurance about the future of the monarchy, about the children's welfare, about the practical implications of your illness. They'll want to know that despite this tragedy, the institution remains strong. Isabella shook her head. They'll want to know that the person they've invested their love in appreciates that love and isn't taking it for granted. They'll want honesty about what's happening, and they'll want to know that their feelings matter to us. Everything else is secondary. Alexander supported his wife's position. Isabella knows our people better than anyone. If she says they need honesty and emotion, then that's what we'll give them. The final version of the speech was unlike any statement ever issued by the royal family. Isabella spoke directly to the camera, her voice calm but filled with emotion, explaining her diagnosis in terms that everyone could understand while expressing gratitude for the decade of support she had received. She asked for privacy for her family during the difficult months ahead, but also promised to continue serving in whatever capacity her health allowed for as long as possible. The broadcast was scheduled for the following evening, but news of the announcement had somehow leaked to the press, creating a media frenzy that forced them to move up the timeline. By noon the next day, camera crews were stationed outside every palace gate, and social media was exploding with speculation and expressions of support from around the world. Isabella spent her last day as a private person writing letters to friends and family, recording video messages for her children's future milestones, and walking through the palace gardens one final time without the weight of public scrutiny. She visited the greenhouse where she had learned to tend the roses that bloomed outside her sitting room window, touched the tree where James had taken his first steps during a garden party 3 years earlier, and sat on the bench where she and Alexander had shared their first kiss as an engaged couple. That evening, as Isabella prepared for the broadcast that would change her life forever, she felt a strange sense of peace. The secret that had been crushing her family for weeks was about to become shared knowledge, which meant they would no longer have to carry the burden alone. The love and support that the public had always shown their royal family would sustain them through the darkness ahead. At 8 o'clock, Isabella looked directly into the camera lens and spoke the words that would break the hearts of millions while demonstrating the grace and courage that had made her beloved. My dear friends, I come to you tonight with news that will sadden many of you as much as it has saddened my family. I have been diagnosed with cancer, and despite the very best medical care, my doctors have told me that my time with you will be shorter than any of us had hoped. Around the world, viewers watched as their princess shared her most private pain with characteristic dignity, asking not for pity but for understanding, not for false hope, but for the continued love that had sustained her throughout her royal journey. It was, in its own way, the most courageous moment of her remarkable decade of service. The response to Isabella's announcement was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the broadcast, Buckingham Palace's website crashed from the volume of messages pouring in from around the world. Flowers, cards, and gifts began arriving by the thousands, creating impromptu shrines outside every royal residence. The hashtag Princess Isabella Strong trended globally as people shared their own stories of illness, loss, and the impact the royal couple had made on their lives. The international media coverage was unlike anything the palace had experienced since Alexander and Isabella's wedding. News anchors struggled to maintain their professional composure while reporting the story, and even traditionally Republican newspapers published tribute articles celebrating Isabella's decade of service. World leaders issued statements of support, while celebrities and ordinary citizens alike shared memories of meeting the princess or being touched by her charitable work. But, for Isabella, the most meaningful responses came from the children and families she had worked with over the years. The literacy program she had championed sent a video compilation of children reading their favorite books aloud, dedicating their words to the princess who had taught them to love stories. The mental health charity she had supported received its largest single-day donation total in history as people contributed in her honor. The practical realities of her new existence as a publicly dying princess proved more challenging than Isabella had anticipated. Security had to be dramatically increased after several incidents involving overzealous supporters trying to reach her with supposed miracle cures or simply to offer comfort. Her daily schedule, once filled with engagements and meetings, now revolved around medical appointments and carefully planned appearances designed to conserve her diminishing energy. Dr. Thornfield had established a palliative care routine that maximized Isabella's comfort while allowing her to remain as active as possible for as long as possible. The treatments bought time, but came with side effects that made maintaining her public persona increasingly difficult. Some days, the medications left her too nauseous to eat breakfast with her children. Other days, the fatigue was so overwhelming that she had to cancel engagements at the last minute, disappointing supporters who had traveled hundreds of miles hoping to see her. Alexander had transformed into something beyond a devoted husband, becoming Isabella's fiercest protector and advocate. He rearranged his own schedule to be present for every medical appointment, learned to administer her medications, and took over many of her royal duties while insisting publicly that she remained his equal partner in their work. The strain was visible in new lines around his eyes, and the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. The children adapted to their new reality with the resilience that Isabella both admired and envied. After the family's carefully planned conversation about her illness, James had assumed the role of his mother's protector, bringing her tea when she looked tired and reading to Emma when Isabella needed to rest. Emma responded with increased clinginess, rarely leaving her mother's side, and often climbing into bed with her parents in the middle of the night, as if physical proximity could ward off the approaching loss. 1 month after the announcement, Isabella made what she privately knew would be her final public appearance at the annual Commonwealth service. She had insisted on attending despite her doctor's concerns, wanting to honor the decades of tradition and the representatives from 54 nations who had gathered to celebrate their shared values and history. The service at Westminster Abbey was emotionally charged from the moment Isabella entered the historic building. The congregation of 2,000 rose to their feet in sustained applause, many openly weeping as they watched the princess, visibly thinner but still radiant in her royal blue coat and matching hat, walk slowly down the aisle beside Alexander. She paused to greet various dignitaries and Commonwealth leaders, her conversation with each person brief but clearly meaningful. During the service, Isabella delivered what would be her final public speech, a reflection on the meaning of service and the bonds that connect people across cultures and continents. Her voice, though softer than before, carried the same warmth and sincerity that had characterized her public speaking throughout her royal career. "Service is not about the grand gestures or the ceremonial moments," she said, looking directly at the cameras that would carry her words around the world. "True service lies in the quiet moments of connection, the simple acts of kindness, the willingness to listen and to care. Each of you here today represents millions of people who understand that service to others is service to something greater than ourselves." She continued, "In the Commonwealth, we have created a family that spans continents and cultures, united not by force or obligation, but by choice and shared values. That family has sustained me throughout my illness, and I know it will continue to thrive long after my time with you has ended. The greatest gift you can give me is to continue caring for each other with the same generosity of spirit that you have shown my family." The response was immediate and profound. Commonwealth leaders abandoned protocol to approach Isabella personally, sharing their own stories of how her example had influenced their work in their home countries. The Archbishop of Canterbury, in his closing remarks, spoke of witnessing grace under pressure that illuminates the very best of human nature. After the service, Isabella and Alexander attended a private reception where she was able to have more personal conversations with friends and colleagues from her years of royal service. Many of these people had worked closely with her on various charitable initiatives, and had become genuinely fond of the woman behind the royal title. The farewells were heartbreaking, as everyone understood they were unlikely to see Isabella again in an official capacity. Lady Margaret Thorne, who had collaborated with Isabella on several women's empowerment projects, struggled to maintain her composure. "You've changed so many lives, Your Highness. Please know that your work will continue long after." She couldn't finish the sentence. Isabella embraced her warmly. "That's all any of us can hope for, isn't it? That the good we try to do outlasts our ability to do it ourselves." The drive back to the palace was quiet, both Alexander and Isabella emotionally drained from the intensity of the day. As they passed through the familiar streets of London, Isabella noticed that people had gathered along the route, many holding signs thanking her for her years of service or simply expressing their love. The sight of ordinary families standing in the cold to show their support moved her deeply. That evening, as Isabella helped Emma with her bedtime routine and listened to James practice his piano, she felt a profound sense of completion. She had said goodbye to her public life with dignity and grace, surrounded by the love and respect she had earned through a decade of genuine service. Now she could focus entirely on her family and the precious time they had left together. The palace released a statement the following day announcing that Princess Isabella would be stepping back from all official engagements to focus on her health and family. It was the formal end of one of the most beloved royal careers in modern history, but for Isabella, it marked the beginning of the most important chapter of her life. Teaching her children how to face loss with courage, showing Alexander how to carry on their shared legacy, and demonstrating that even in dying, one could continue to live with purpose and love. The months that followed Isabella's final public appearance unfolded with the strange mixture of heartbreak and grace that had come to define her journey with terminal illness. The palace had established new routines that balanced the family's need for privacy with the public's desire to support their beloved princess during her final months. Weekly updates were released about Isabella's condition, always honest but never sensationalized, allowing the nation to share in their grief while respecting the family's dignity. Isabella's days became structured around the activities that brought her the most joy and meaning. Mornings were reserved for time with James and Emma, helping with homework, reading stories, and creating the kinds of ordinary family memories that had become precious beyond measure. She had commissioned a local artist to paint a series of family portraits, not formal royal images, but intimate scenes of their daily life together, wanting her children to have visual reminders of her love long after she was gone. The afternoons often brought visitors from the various charities and organizations Isabella had championed throughout her royal career. She insisted on continuing some of her work from home, reviewing grant applications for her literacy foundation, recording video messages for upcoming fundraising events, and personally writing thank you notes to major donors and volunteers. Her study had become a command center for transitioning her charitable responsibilities to other members of the royal family and trusted colleagues who would carry on her initiatives. Alexander had proven himself to be remarkably adaptable, learning to braid Emma's hair with the same precision he brought to state documents, mastering the art of bedtime stories, and somehow maintaining his own royal duties while being fully present for every moment of Isabella's decline. The love between them had deepened rather than diminished under the pressure of impending loss, each day together feeling both precious and painful. One particularly meaningful afternoon, Isabella received a visit from Sarah Chun, a young woman who had participated in Isabella's mentorship program for at-risk youth 5 years earlier. Sarah had graduated from university the previous spring and was now working as a social worker in the same community where Isabella had first met her. "I wanted to tell you that I name-drop you constantly," Sarah confessed with a laugh, sitting in Isabella's private sitting room overlooking the garden. "When kids tell me they can't change their circumstances, I tell them about the princess who told me that our backgrounds don't determine our futures, our choices do." Isabella smiled, remembering the angry, defensive teenager Sarah had been when they first met. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You're proof that my faith in young people was never misplaced." "Actually," Sarah continued, "I wanted to ask if you would consider recording a message for the kids in our program. Not as the princess, just as Isabella. They need to hear from someone who believed in impossible things and made them happen." That evening, Isabella recorded what would become one of her most cherished final contributions to the causes she loved. Speaking directly to young people facing their own seemingly impossible circumstances, she shared the lessons she had learned about resilience, hope, and the power of refusing to let limitations define your dreams. The video would eventually be viewed millions of times and become a cornerstone of youth mentorship programs around the world. As autumn turned to winter, Isabella's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The good days became fewer and farther between, and simple activities like walking through the palace gardens required assistance. But even as her physical strength diminished, her emotional presence seemed to intensify. Friends and family later described feeling like Isabella was somehow more herself than ever during those final months, as if approaching death had stripped away everything non-essential and left only the pure essence of who she was. The children adapted to each new limitation with remarkable grace, learning to have conversations in whispers when their mother was resting, bringing her flowers from the garden when she was too weak to walk there herself, and creating elaborate art projects to brighten her room. Emma had begun sleeping in her parents' bed most nights, wanting to be close to her mother, while James took on increasing responsibility around the house, determined to help his father manage everything that needed managing. One December evening, as snow began falling outside the palace windows, Isabella gathered her family around her for what she knew would be one of their last conversations as a complete family unit. Dr. Thornfield had privately told Alexander that Isabella likely had days, not weeks, remaining. "I want to talk to you both about something very important," Isabella began, speaking to James and Emma while Alexander sat beside her, his hand intertwined with hers. "You know that I'm very sick, and that the doctors can't make me better." Both children nodded solemnly. They had lived with this reality for months now and had developed their own ways of processing the approaching loss. "I need you to know that dying isn't something I'm choosing, but it's something I'm learning to do with love instead of fear," Isabella continued. "And I need you both to promise me that you'll remember that love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes, but it doesn't disappear." Emma climbed onto her mother's lap with careful gentleness. "Will you still be able to hear us if we talk to you?" Isabella kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I think love finds a way to listen, even when we can't answer back in the usual ways. So yes, I believe I'll always be able to hear you." James, trying hard to be brave, asked the question that had been haunting him for weeks. "Will Daddy be okay? Will we be okay without you?" Isabella looked at Alexander, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes, but also the strength that had sustained them both through this impossible journey. "Your father is the strongest, most loving man I've ever known. He'll take care of you, and you'll take care of him, and you'll all learn how to carry my love with you wherever you go." That night, after the children were finally asleep, Isabella and Alexander talked until dawn about practical matters and impossible dreams, about their regrets and their gratitude, about the life they had built together and the future they wouldn't share. They spoke about the letters Isabella had written for every milestone the children would face without her, about the trust fund she had established for causes close to her heart, and about Alexander's plan to establish a foundation in her memory that would continue her work with literacy and mental health initiatives. 3 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning while her family slept peacefully around her, Princess Isabella Victoria Cambridge died as she had lived, surrounded by love and facing the unknown with remarkable grace. Alexander was holding her hand, and even in her final moments, she had managed one last gentle squeeze, 3 circles traced on his palm. "I love you." The announcement of her death was met with an unprecedented outpouring of grief and love from around the world. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the children and families whose lives she had touched through her charitable work. They didn't send flowers or formal condolences. Instead, they sent drawings and letters and videos, sharing stories about how Princess Isabella had changed their lives and promising to carry forward her belief in the power of kindness and service. Alexander, now a widowed father facing the daunting task of raising 2 children while serving as future king, found strength in these messages and in the foundation of love that Isabella had built around their family. The fairy tale had ended not with happily ever after, but with something perhaps more meaningful, the promise that true love, once given, becomes eternal, continuing to inspire and heal long after the giver is gone. In the years that followed, whenever people spoke of Princess Isabella, they didn't dwell on how her story ended, but on how beautifully she had chosen to live every day she was given. Her legacy became not the tragedy of a life cut short, but the triumph of a woman who had loved completely and served faithfully, proving that even in the face of loss, grace and dignity could prevail.